This is the all-new 2026 Hyundai Palisade, and when they say all new, they really mean all new. It gets a new multi-blade grille that gives you the closest shave in the industry, a new 3.5-liter V6, and a new hybrid system under the hood. More luxury options than ever before, including a power second and power third row seat. It has one of the roomiest mother-in-law rows this side of a minivan. But the best thing about the Palisade is that they have really tried to keep price tag creep under control. In a world of ever-increasing MSRPs, this starts at $38,935 plus destination, price as equipped right up there, and the calligraphy model started at $54,060, plus of course that destination charge. So should you get one of these over a Grand Highlander or even the somewhat related Kia Telluride? Let's find out. Design-wise, Hyundai went in a very different direction with this generation Palisade. Just check out these enormous DRLs on the side. These are also some of the largest front turn signals I have ever seen outside of an enormous pickup truck. This entire module blinks when the turn signals are on. The headlights, those are the slim modules inboard of that. And then of course we get this enormous multi-blade grille up front, which is very distinctive. We also have active grille shutters down there at the bottom of the bumper and the more flush Hyundai logo. The other thing you're going to notice is just how blunt that front end is, even though they say this is more aerodynamic than the outgoing model. Instead of stretching the definition of all new, Hyundai decided to stretch the Palisade. This is longer, taller, and wider than the outgoing model. The body gets a 2.5-inch stretch, but importantly, the wheelbase has been put on the taffy stretcher and stretched out nearly 3 inches over the outgoing model. All of that goes right back there to the second and third row, giving this best-in-class combined legroom figures. But interestingly, the reason the body didn't stretch 2.7 inches with the 2.7-inch wheelbase stretch is that they actually shrunk the front overhang. And we do see some pretty extensive overhangs in the Pilot, the Grand Highlander, and of course that Subaru Ascent. If you need more room on the inside, or you're just not a fan of the high-waisted style of the Santa Fe, you might want to check out the Palisade. Back here we have LED taillight modules that mimic the style of the DRLs up front, and then we have amber turn signals inboard of that. And down at the bottom of the bumper, you'll now be able to get a factory tow hitch, able to tow 5,000 pounds in all models. Even if you never decide to tow in your Palisade, you might appreciate some of the changes that Hyundai made to improve towing capability, which include bigger brakes up front, wide 265 width tires all the way around in this trim, although I probably would have opted for a smaller wheel than these 21-inch wheels on this model, and importantly, a passive load leveling suspension in the back in every trim. You don't have to step up to the top model to get that particular feature. It's not an airbag system like we find in a Grand Cherokee. It's a passive hydraulic damper that adjusts the level of the rear suspension while you're driving down the road. So this is a lot less expensive to maintain long term. Engine downsizing is definitely a modern trend. Just check out the Toyota lineup and the proliferation of that 2.4-liter turbo, or Hyundai's lineup and the proliferation of that 2.5-liter turbo. Even the base version of this is not immune, but it does not get a 4-cylinder turbo. The base engine is a 3.5-liter V6 that's a heavily reworked version of Hyundai's old 3.5-liter V6, so down versus the 3.8 from last year. Horsepower comes in at 287, torque at 260 pound-feet, and you'll get 21 miles per gallon if you choose the front-wheel drive model. The big news, though, is the turbo hybrid system. It pairs that ubiquitous 2.5-liter turbo with a 75 horsepower electric motor and a new 6-speed automatic transmission to give you 329 horsepower, 339 pound-feet of torque. Rather sadly, I have not been able to drive that new hybrid model yet. That's probably coming later this year. It will be on sale in fall of 2025. And that's the one that's going to give you 34 miles per gallon combined. That is less than the standard hybrid system in the Grand Highlander, with performance that should be closer to the Grand Highlander's Hybrid Max system that only gives you 27 miles per gallon. And interesting twist, the design of this hybrid system is actually basically the same as that Toyota Grand Highlander hybrid system, using a 6-speed automatic transmission under the hood in addition to the electric motors. But what's different about Hyundai's hybrid system is that they've been at the game longer, specifically the 6-speed hybrid game longer. So again, haven't driven it yet, but I would expect it to be a little bit smoother. Also worth noting, this is a next generation version of Hyundai's hybrid system that no longer uses the belt alternator starter motor setup. Instead, the motor is integrated into the transmission case. So with previous generation Hyundai hybrids, you had to worry about the cost of inspecting or replacing that accessory belt every 60,000 miles or so. In this setup, you don't have to worry about that. Of course, most people are probably going to want the 3.5-liter V6, so that's the one that we're driving today. An increasing number of mainstream car shoppers are demanding luxury car features, and Hyundai's only too happy to oblige, which is why we find the most adjustable and perhaps the most comfortable driver's seat in this segment. We have inflatable side bolsters, we have an extending ottoman, we have 4-way adjustable lumbar support, 2-position memory, and massage in this front seat as well. The steering column, on the other hand, is still manual, and I think that's fine because there are a few luxury car companies that still don't have power steering columns. We have a lot of headroom up front. Even though this model has the panoramic moonroof, I still have several inches of headroom left. Could easily wear a hat in here if I wanted to, and like we see in a lot of Korean models, the front seat tracks are pretty long. So if you're a taller driver, this seat goes much further back than some of the smaller SUVs that you might want to cross-shop against it. But let's go ahead and move this forward to my more comfortable and preferred driving position so we can check out that second row. Back here we find a feature that I definitely appreciate, which is a second row seat that lets you leave a child seat latch anchored into position and still tilt and slide the seat forward. Although I probably would want the manual seat because it takes an awful lot longer for these powered seats to move if you're trying to get people and children in and out of the vehicle. This seat slides forward and backward as well, although the seat bottom cushion does not adjust for tilt as much as you might think. It does, but you know, not as much as the front seats, obviously. With this seat comfortably in position all the way back in its tracks, just check out that legroom. I have about a foot of legroom between me and this front seat. So if you're a taller driver and you want to put those big rear-facing child seats behind, you should have absolutely no problem in here. We have 100-watt USB-C power ports in every row, kind of an interesting touch. And very Hyundai, we have the buttons over here on the passenger seat that allow you to play with this front seat from the back. That's probably something I would want to skip because, or lock out in software, because if I was a kid, I know I would be playing with that all the time, especially if my parent was in the front seat. The rear seat air vents are up here on the ceiling, and you'll find the controls right here in the middle of everything, including the ventilated second row seat controls, heated second row seat controls as well. And cool touch with these air vents is you can have very direct air on you, or you can close that and then open the valve to that position right there, and then have diffuse air kind of come across the ceiling. In the center console area, we find a 150-watt power inverter outlet and a really long storage bin that comes out of that center console. Now, if you didn't want to wait for those second row seats to tilt and slide like that, you could just walk through the middle. Back here in the third row, we find some of the more interesting options, which include a power recline mechanism, we've seen that in some luxury vehicles, and a powered slide mechanism, something that we really don't see very often in three-row vehicles at all. This allows you to maximize the cargo area in the back and get 20.2 cubic feet back there, or 19.1 cubic feet with these seats all the way back there like that. But let's go ahead and have this second row seat power back into place so we talk about everything else going on back here. Headroom is especially generous. I have about an inch of headroom left in the third row. Now keep in mind, the seat bottom cushion is pretty low to the ground. You can see how high up my legs are, but there's definitely a lot of room. I'll go ahead and move this second row seat all the way back so you can see what it would look like honestly most of the time. As you can see, I have about 2 inches of legroom left. Still pretty respectable. Now there are 3 seat belts back here because you can get an 8-passenger version of the Palisade, although most of them are probably going to be 7-passenger versions on the dealer lot. The shoulder belt comes out of the ceiling and it is offset to one side. So if you want to put child seats back here, just keep that in mind. On the other hand, we have actual dedicated latch anchors for each of the outboard third row seat positions. That's more useful than you might think given the amount of legroom we find in here, 119.3 inches combined, which beats even the Chevy Traverse, Acadia, and Enclave. Of course, it is still a mainstream vehicle, so even though we have those power seat controls back here, we have lots of hard plastics, cup holders over here on the side, which is definitely a contrast from the second row, which gets lots of soft touch plastics on the doors, cup holders in my least favorite location there on the door, and well-integrated sunshades right there. If you have the power seats, you'll have this button module in the cargo area, which allows you to fold up and down both the second and third rows. You can also scoot those rows forward and backward as needed. There's even this all button if you want everything to drop at the same time. Again, though, power seats definitely take a little bit longer than manual seats, so I tend to prefer manual seats, especially for third row. Let's move these bags out of the way so you can see what kind of cargo capacity we're dealing with back here. This is not quite as large as some of the competition, but it's pretty close, especially if you scoot that third row seat forward, where you would lose a little bit of room, but not as much as you might think, because again, more room than the competition. Under the load floor, we have a decent amount of additional storage space, jack there, tire iron, etc. No tire inflator kit because we actually have a spare tire located under the vehicle. In case you're wondering, you don't lose any cargo capacity for choosing the hybrid model because the battery is located approximately under the right side second row and first row passenger seats. That does result in a loss of a little bit of legroom, but not horizontal legroom. And that's because legroom is calculated from the floorboards up here to your knee back to a hip point. So if your feet are a little bit higher off the ground, that reduces your legroom number. And so you will have your feet a little bit more in your chest apparently in the hybrid version versus this model. I think that's a small price to pay. You won't get the spare tire, but they do not remove the spare tire well, so you should be able to buy the parts aftermarket and actually stick a spare tire in that Palisade hybrid. More on that later. The design department didn't just go in a different direction on the outside, they definitely went in a different direction versus the Santa Fe on the inside. But before we take a look at this dashboard, which is definitely quite tall, let's take a look at the ceiling. In this model, which is the top end trim, we have a suede headliner, well, imitation suede, I guess I should say, touch controls for the map lights, things like that. This dual pane panoramic moonroof where we have a big pane in the rear and a relatively smaller pane up front. We have a powered shade in the back, but a manual shade up front. The materials in here definitely have a very premium feel. This model has the available Napa leather. If you get some of the other trims, you'll find fabric or imitation leather or a lower grade of leather. This one has the calligraphy logo embossed right there on the head restraint. And for the second row seats, we have four-way adjustable head restraints with this butterfly feature. Most models will have the choice of an ivory or charcoal interior, but the calligraphy gets a brown interior option and an ivory and navy option that both look really interesting. We have lots of premium materials going on over here on the driver's door. Actually better than we find in the Ioniq 9. This interior definitely has some vibes that are similar to the Ioniq 9, but I would say generally superior parts quality and attention to detail. Up here we find a soft touch upper section of the dashboard, after stitched as well. A fabric lower section there, imitation wood trim that I think is relatively well done in this area, soft touch materials wrapping around that lower portion of the dash, and then hard plastics down here at the bottom. There is a pretty deep storage area right there where you could toss your smartphones, so you can see right there. We have a fairly small glove compartment. I think that's the downside to that storage area, and I think I would rather have had a larger glove box. Moving over to the dashboard, we find no shiny black plastic, which is a nice touch here in the bulk of the dashboard. Instead, this is kind of what Nissan has been doing with kind of a striped effect to a matte finished plastic. That's definitely going to hold up better over time. But there are some bits of shiny black plastic. For instance, this bezel right there around the infotainment system. Now, this infotainment system is the familiar Hyundai one on a 12.3-inch screen. Of course, the latest Hyundai software there. And then we find a full LCD instrument cluster over here. The full LCD cluster is not standard, but you will probably find it on most of the trims on the dealer lot. Coming down here, we have lots of physical controls. I really appreciate the fact that they didn't go touch screen for a lot of these. Auto brake hold over here, the drive mode, terrain switch over there. You can switch between whether that's drive and terrain. Hill descent control, parking sensors, 360-degree camera system. This is still a really good 360-degree camera setup. Dual zone automatic climate control for the front with a third zone controllable here as well. Then in this center console area, we have what they're calling a floating center console. Behind here, we have a pretty deep storage area where you can put bags, purses, things like that, and a 12-volt power outlet. Up here, we have two really big cup holders, more of that imitation wood trim that maybe you can see a little bit better in this light. Two 100-watt charge-only ports for USB-C, and then an interface port that works with a system that puts out less power. This UVC button is the UV sterilizer for this storage bin here. That's something that we first saw in the Santa Fe. They're continuing it here. This storage area is not as big as I thought, probably because of that pull-out storage area from the back. We then have a Qi wireless charger right there that was able to charge through some of the thicker cases that we tested with. You might be wondering, where's the shifter? Well, Ioniq style, that's over here on the steering column, in addition to the engine start-stop button right there. Park is the button over there on the side. This little module, that's part of the driver attention monitoring system, and then we have a two-tone leather-wrapped steering wheel with the latest in Hyundai, which is the 4 dots instead of the letter H on the steering wheel. Controls for the infotainment system, they're basically over there, with track forward, backward, and volume up, down over here. To the left of the steering wheel, we have another air vent. You can see more of the detail on that styling. Maybe if I move my hand out of the way so the camera can focus. And then some controls down here for dimmer, parking brake. This is the new tow mode. They're saying that it has an integrated trailer brake controller, but I haven't been able to experience that. Hopefully we'll get more information from Hyundai on this over time, but you can see over here in the checklist, we have the check the trailer brakes, although it doesn't say how we would do that. Over here under settings, we have tow mode where you can choose lightweight, medium weight, or heavyweight trailer. They said that adjusts the trailer gain, but I don't see any way to actually verify that or any way to manually engage the trailer brakes. All right, it's time to get the new Palisade out on the road. Bearing in mind we have that new 3.5-liter V6 engine under the hood, 0 to 60 times are a little bit slower than maybe some of you had hoped. This model went 0 to 60 out here, mind you, not in our usual test area, at 8.3 seconds. There are 2 of us in the vehicle and we're not at sea level, so, it could be maybe a 1/10 or 2/10 of a second faster. I would expect that the hybrid system with nearly 330 horsepower is probably going to be the quicker 0 to 60 model, but unfortunately we haven't been able to test that one just yet. Now, unusually, Hyundai has actually quoted a 60 to 0 stopping distance for this vehicle, or I should say 62 miles an hour to 60. They're saying 127 feet for that. That sounds about right given the curb weight and the size of the Palisade. Now, speaking of size, this has become larger than the last Palisade, but honestly, it doesn't feel big. This does not drive large like a Traverse or an Acadia does. It's not exactly sporty out on these winding mountain roads up here near Healdsburg. You'll definitely notice there's some tip and dive, there's some body roll, etc., but it doesn't feel floaty-boaty. It doesn't feel big like the Chevy and the GMC can. And coming away from stoplights and stop signs, it definitely doesn't feel slow. In fact, actually where I would say this feels a little bit sluggish compared to some of the competition is actually more in that passing power. About 40 to 60 miles an hour, that's where this feels a little bit slower than some of the competition. Definitely a little bit less peppy than the Honda Pilot and its 10-speed automatic transmission. Of course, I don't think most people are buying a 3-row family SUV for its driving dynamics. You should know that this feels stable, it feels competent, but if you're looking for something overtly sporty, then you're probably going to be shopping in a different direction. This is not going to drive like an SRT Durango or a Mazda CX-90, but it is going to be a lot more practical than either of those options. It's also going to be quieter in the cabin. Bearing again in mind that we aren't testing this on our usual road surfaces, we measured 60 decibels in here at 50 miles an hour. This is definitely a quieter cabin than the last Palisade and significantly quieter than something like a Grand Highlander or even that Honda Pilot. Hyundai says that they have added a number of things to help us get there. We have full acoustic laminated front glass standard, that's windshield, even this little side window here by the mirror, and of course the main windows up front. In this top end trim, we also have laminated side windows in the second row. That's really going to help out that higher speed wind noise out at 70 miles an hour or even faster if you're in Texas. And then we have more foam underneath our seats. The entire floor is now covered in foam. There's even foam inside the tire itself to help reduce road noise. That's a trick that we've seen in luxury cars, but we now see here in the Palisade. Let's get this up on Highway 101 so we can see how it does on the road here. Definitely enough pep to get us up to freeway speeds here, absolutely no problem. I really appreciate the side view cameras that are integrated into the LCD instrument cluster. That's a much more convenient location for that display than the systems that put it over here in the infotainment system, especially if you're turning left or merging to the left. On the other hand, visibility is actually up in this Palisade versus the last model, something that we don't normally say, because the rear windows back there for the third row have become larger and squarer than before. And I really noticed that here in the rearview mirror, where you could certainly see off to the side better than we could in the last Palisade. Out here at 65 or 70 miles an hour, the quietness of this cabin is really obvious. This is definitely more refined feeling and refined sounding than the Grand Highlander, especially versus, the 2.4-liter turbo that Toyota is using in more and more of their models. The regular Highlander, for instance, definitely needs more sound deadening between the engine and the passenger compartment. This still has that V6 soundtrack, if that's what you're interested in, and it sounds a little bit more refined than the General Motors 2.5-liter turbo as well. Ride quality is about what you'd expect for a top-end trim. We have the lowest profile tires on this model and the biggest wheels, so you certainly are going to feel those small imperfections out on the highway here. But it's a generally comfortable ride given the tire size and the design of the vehicle. An interesting touch is that we have a standard rear load leveling suspension in every model, but it's not an air suspension. So if you're worried about long-term maintenance costs, this is a different kind of rear load leveling suspension. You can Google Nivamat, that is a ZF technology. This is not exactly a Nivamat rear suspension, but the design of it is really quite close. Essentially, inside the damper, there's some valves and a fluid reservoir, and it actually uses the hydraulic fluid inside the damper to adjust for the extra weight in the rear. So that helps improve not just driving dynamics and ride quality, but also payload and towing capability. If you plan on towing 5,000 pounds regularly with your mainstream vehicle like this is going to be better able to compensate for payload and the tongue weight back there on the rear. And importantly, this kind of load leveling damper is not as expensive to replace as an airbag that you'd find in, for instance, a Jeep Grand Cherokee L. That system is going to be a lot more expensive to maintain later. This type of rear damper is going to be a little bit more expensive than a regular shock or a regular damper, but it's not a huge difference. We're talking maybe 5 or 10% more expensive when you actually need to go and replace it. But the lifetime is very similar to a regular damper setup as well. The one thing that hasn't improved in this generation is fuel economy. Even though we have that new engine that they say reduces emissions, it doesn't actually improve fuel economy. So they're talking about smog causing emissions, not fuel efficiency. That is basically the same. About 21 miles per gallon on average for the front-wheel drive model, a little bit lower for the all-wheel drive model, and decidedly average for this segment. What's not average, though, is the promised fuel economy on that new hybrid model. They're saying that's going to be 34 miles per gallon. I am really intrigued to drive that. Hopefully we'll be able to do that sometime between now and when it goes on sale, fall of 2025, because that's a really good fuel efficiency number when you start picking it apart. Yes, you will get about 2 miles per gallon on average better in a Grand Highlander, but you're going to get a lot less power in the base hybrid system. In the Hybrid Max system in the Grand Highlander, you'll get a little bit more power, perhaps better performance, although we don't know exactly yet, but that one actually has way lower fuel economy than this. 27 miles per gallon on average in that model versus the 34 mpg that the Palisade Hybrid is going to be rated for. I'm really intrigued to see how that actually works out in practice. But for the moment, bottom line out on the road, the Palisade is a really solid option. It feels as engaging as a 3-row SUV needs to be, admittedly not as engaging as some of those rear-wheel drive options, but it also is very practical, very quiet, and very comfortable. And I think those last things are what most 3-row shoppers are really interested in. So how much will a Palisade set you back? Well, the base model again starts at $38,395 plus a $1,495 destination charge. I would not be surprised if that destination charge grew over the course of the 2026 model year. That's a trick we've seen some companies do to try and offset the cost of tariffs, because this will be built in South Korea, at least for the moment. That base model is an 8-passenger version. It's really well equipped, but it has only the single LCD in the center of the dashboard. The SEL trim has leatherette upholstery, $41,440. I think a lot of customers are going to start at that model, and that makes sense because the price tag is a little bit closer to some of the big options that this is competing with. The limited trim gets you leather upholstery for $49,270, but it's 7-passenger only. On the other hand, it is going to get you pretty close to this in terms of its feature capability. The new XRT model, which you probably will want to look at if you want something a little bit more rugged looking, that's going to be $49,370. It's also 7-passenger only, as is this calligraphy model, which started at $54,060 and well equipped, well, fully loaded, I should say, as we're looking at here, basically about $57,500. Bearing in mind that the average new vehicle transaction in the US currently is around $48,000 or $49,000, the Palisade is a pretty decent deal. It's an even better deal when you stack this against something like an Acura MDX or a Buick Enclave. It's not going to have the athleticism of an MDX, and it's not going to have some of the style that I like in the Enclave, but it's going to be a much better deal, and it's going to be bigger inside, especially versus that Acura. And that's really where the Palisade shines. That big second row, the big comfortable third row behind. If you want something roomier than this, you're going to have to look at a limited number of full-size SUVs. Not every full-size SUV is actually going to be bigger back there in the way back than the Palisade, or a minivan, of course. So let me know what you think about all that down there in the comments section below. How does it stack up against the Grand Highlander? Honestly, so far pretty easy. If you're not looking for a hybrid, I would choose this over the Grand Highlander any day. The third row is a little bit roomier, a little bit more usable. The second row more comfortable. The first row definitely more comfortable if we're talking about the top end trims, and it's a better value, I would say, than the Grand Highlander as well. I do love the look of the Grand Highlander though. I think it looks fantastic. This, not as big of a fan of the Gillette front end, but you know, it's growing on me a little bit. Versus the Grand Highlander Hybrid, I would probably choose this or its hybrid model over the Hybrid Max, but stay tuned because we haven't driven one yet, so jury is still out there. Over the regular hybrid in the Grand Highlander though, that's tricky because that is Toyota's legendary regular hybrid system, so it should be fantastically reliable. It also is pretty efficient. It's just also relatively slow because it's not terribly powerful. And this is certainly going to have better performance than that regular hybrid Grand Highlander for a lower price tag. I would expect the hybrid system here to be priced more like the regular hybrid system in the Grand Highlander when we get pricing, but performance-wise be closer to the Hybrid Max. Again, for details though, you're gonna have to wait until we can get our hands on one, at least for a day or so. So be sure and stay tuned for that. In the meantime, let me know what you think about all that down there in the comment section below. Would you go this direction? Would you get something like the Kia Telluride, which we all know should be getting a lot of these changes at some point in the future? See all of you later.